Okay, everybody, we'll make a start. Welcome to Pixel presentation on the foundation tier paper for Unit 1. And the way that we'll structure this session is I'll go through the paper, each of the different questions. I'll talk to you about how many marks the questions are worth, how we advise you to perhaps tackle the reading of those questions, and obviously, more importantly, the writing of them. We'll do a little bit of modelled work as well, modelling annotations and modelling up the writing, and we'll do that in real time. And at the end, I'll answer any questions that you may have, and where appropriate, I'll send those replies to everybody. I would imagine we'll go for about an hour, give or take, and then at the end, we'll probably allow about 15-20 minutes for questions. I will then load up this presentation, hopefully onto Huddle, along with the PowerPoint that we used as well. So if any of you wanted to review what we talked about and some of the things that we went through, there'll be plenty of scope for you to do that later on today or in the week. Okay. So the foundation tier paper. Make sure in front of you you've got a copy of that paper, ideally in colour, although some of you may not have been able to do that, so that's fine. And the question booklet as well is helpful, although I will actually display what the questions are and the way that we're going to answer those. You might want to also make a note of the things that we go through, so using highlighters and some additional paper, and again have the three sources in front of you. One of the things that some students do, which might work quite well for you, if there's a particular piece of writing or something displayed on the screen, feel free to take a screenshot of that, and that might be a good way to kind of refer to that later on. So what is it you actually get in the exam hall itself? Well, by now, most of you would have already sat a copy of this exam, so you will know pretty much, you'll be familiar with the fact that the answer booklet is one big, usually about 16-page booklet. And then inside of that, all joined together, you'll have three source materials. And so for January 2013, the source 1 was this, source 2 was that, and source 3 was this. And hopefully you've got all that in front of you at the moment, because we're going to go through each one sequentially, how you should go about answering the questions and what information you should glean and how you should try and use that. And the important thing to bear in mind with these three sources is they'll usually be different, and some might be more text heavy, others may be more image heavy, and some will probably have a combination of both. And one of the things that we're going to keep returning to is this idea of genre. And what is this piece of text? What is this source? Who's it aimed at? Who's the audience or intended audience? And what's the intended purpose of that source material? And once you've kind of got that straight in your mind, you'll be able to help answering the questions and have a clear focus of what those questions will be. So that's what you get in the exam hall. The reading section in total is 1 hour, 15 minutes long. And there is 15 minutes of that time is allocated for reading. And I suppose you've got two choices there. One, that you do all the reading up front and use your 15 minutes and then answer the questions. And probably better, and the strategy that we're going to employ today, is to read each source and then answer the questions on that source. And the 4 questions are split like that. So you have 1A and 1B, which comprise 8 marks. Question 2 for 8 marks. Question 3 for 12, and question 4 is 12, giving you a total of 40 marks for this section. There's a writing section which we're going to look at tomorrow, which is also worth 40 marks, making the exam in total 80 marks. We're going to be quite ambitious today because I think it's relatively straightforward to get these marks, but also if we aim particularly high, then if we fall short a little bit, we'll hopefully still get that all-important C that we're after. And if we're aiming for a C, to be absolutely on the safe side, we're looking to get about 54 marks in total for the whole exam. And if we do that, we need about 27 marks for the reading paper, give or take. And so what we're kind of working on today is to get about 6 out of 8 for question 1, 5 out of 8 for question 2, 8 out of 12 for questions 3 and 4, giving you 27. And like I said, if you fall slightly short of that, then we still should be on track to get a C. I will go through and explain what the focus of these different questions are, but I just wanted to give you that overview of the whole paper and pretty much what we're aiming for on each question as the minimum, I guess. And to reassure you, particularly maybe for questions 3 and 4, that maybe 8 out of 12 is high. At no point in any of this working out do we have to actually enter the top boundary on the mark scheme to get these marks. So they're more than easily within our grasp, which is good news. So question 1, like I said a minute ago, is always split into 2 parts. And question 1A is a little bit like a warm-up activity, where you're just asked to really find 4 things relating to what you've just read, 4 things that you learn through what you've read. 1B is slightly different, and it requires you to identify some ideas about the text and then make some inferences. So it's just really taking on that idea of finding things, but show that you've understood them as well. And you're assessed on finding and understanding information. The key information you need to be aware of is below in the box here. And that's that question 1 is always based on source 1. Both parts are worth 4 marks, giving you a total of 8. And we think you can gain a minimum of 6, and a lot of you will get 7 or 8 marks for this because it's relatively straightforward. There are some things that you should be aiming to do as you read through the text, and one of those is highlighting topic sentences. A topic sentence is whatever happens to be the focus of that paragraph. Maybe some paragraphs that isn't clear, or that others there might be more than one topics. But broadly speaking, in most of the things that you read, you'll be able to highlight one thing and say that is the topic sentence. Alternatively, it's always useful to keep a running commentary in the paragraph margins of just in 1 or 2 words summarising the things that you've just read, so that when it comes to answering the questions, you're nice and clear where the information is. We think, including reading time, you need to spend about 18 minutes on this. If you spend much more, that will obviously eat in for some of the other questions later on that are worth more marks. So 18 minutes is about right. And you're aiming for all 4 points in question A, and maybe about 2 points with inferences and examples in section B. If you can write reasonably quickly and you can identify 3, then that's a good thing. So what does this look like? Well, this is source 1 that you should have in front of you. And as I've already mentioned, when you're encountered with a new text, you should try and think to yourself, what is this? What is this source? And it's not going to gain you any marks necessarily, but understanding the type of text and who it's aimed for and what it's trying to do to the reader will give you a really valuable insight into understanding what you're being asked to locate or to show that you've read. So it's, with your highlighter, you just think to yourself, well, it's The Guardian, so it's a reputable newspaper. It's clearly online, which has implications, and quite often a favourite in Source 1 is some kind of news article, whether it be from the Daily Mail, the Guardian, the Independent, or the Telegraph. And you can kind of locate what the focus is by tracing through the visual clues. So along the top, you've got the different sections of the online paper, drilling down into the environment, and then more specifically into subjects related to insects. And the titles, makes it clear: UK's rarest spider moves house into plastic bottle. And then the subheading: Ladybird spider to be released. So you kind of get the sense that this is going to be about conservation. It's going to be information about how a group of spiders are being protected and conserved. And so it's really about informing and explaining. So that's the kind of focus of the things that you need to annotate as you read through. It's probably worth looking at the actual questions as well. So only obviously question 1, and it just gives you an idea when I'm reading through this text, what am I focusing on? And you can see here, you're looking to find 4 things that you learn about lady spiders. And obviously 1B also applies to question 1. So here we're being asked to identify what we understand about how the ladybird spider is being saved. Right, so 2 things, 2 distinct things. One is what we learn about the spiders themselves, and 2, what do we understand about how the ladybird spider is being saved? So that's in the back of our mind. So we should go back to the source material here. I'm going to read about maybe the first 4 paragraphs, just to give you an insight into the process that I think we could go through to achieve some success. So the UK's rarest spider is to be saved from extinction when conservation experts release the species into a new home in Dorset using plastic bottles. So this is all about the UK's rarest spider being saved from extinction. So I think that's the topic of that particular paragraph. If I'm not sure, if I want to look at a different model, then what I can simply do is just put a little note here about spider saved. And so I've got a little kind of a clue at the side just to remind me of things that I'm reading. The ladybird spider is one of the most colourful spiders in Britain. But by the 1990s, only 56 were left. There are now more than 1,000, thanks to the efforts of conservationists and the spiders being ready to be released into new areas. So this is about the nature of the spider being colourful and about the plans to release that spider into new areas. So I've highlighted what I think are the main points in that paragraph, what I think are the topics. And again, if I wanted to, I could just put a note here about maybe growing numbers. That's kind of what that paragraph is about, how the spiders have some kind of success in being released and being looked after. Keep going. The first of these planned moves begins with the release of 30 ladybird spiders in the Arne Nature Reserve in Dorset. They'll be closely watching their new home, and if successful, more will be released in the next few years. So this is definitely more about the detail behind the plans to move those spiders. So if I just annotate that, and again in the margin, if I just put a little note for myself, release plans. Now obviously I'll be doing this much more quickly in the exam, and you'll probably use different terms than I will that make sense to you. But already I hope it's nice and clear that I've got spider to be saved, growing numbers, and release plans. And so therefore when I go to my questions, which we just looked at, I already know where to find quotations to support that information. Let's look at one more paragraph, this one here. The spiders will be taken to their new home in plastic water bottles, each filled with heather and moss. Then the bottles will be buried to allow the spiders to crawl out in their own time. So that's quite interesting about the way that the spiders are being saved. So I might put here how transported to their new locations. Right, so imagine that I've done that then through the whole text. What I'll have is 6 or 7 pieces of yellow or green or pink that I've highlighted, and then just some notes in the margin to help me locate that information. And then we need to return to the actual question. And the question says, for question 1A, list 4 things that you learn about ladybird spiders. And I've got one already, that the ladybird spiders are the rarest in the UK. And that was in the first paragraph. And all you really need to do here is just put something pretty much in your own words, ideally in a sentence, and to write out 4 points. So other things that we've learned, I think, are that the ladybird is one of the most colourful. And we can have a quick jot that one down. So I'll just put something like, the spiders are the most colourful. And what I'd aim to have is 4 ideas, broadly that kind of length. So we'll do one more. This is later on when the writer refers to how the male ladybird spiders have bright red bodies. Now really, this is a bit of a gimme, this, in terms of you should be getting 4 out of 4 and your exam should be off to a good start. The only thing that I think can mean that you don't get your marks here is if you haven't read the question clearly. So, like I said to you earlier, when you read the question, look carefully about what the focus is. The question is, list 4 things you learn about ladybird spiders. So there's all sorts of details in the text about, as we've already looked at, to do with how they're being saved, different people's views on those later on, and so on and so forth. I think I would be nice and clear that I'm focusing on the details themselves of the spiders, and a lot of that comes in some of these later paragraphs when we get information about their length, their habitat, and so on. So that shouldn't really pose too many problems. If we now move on to the second question, this is when things get a little bit trickier, not much more, but just a little bit trickier. And it says here for question 1B, what do you understand about how the ladybird spider is being saved from extinction. And helpfully, and this hasn't always been the case, but I think it's more likely to be so for the exam that you're sitting shortly, is you get some bullet points just to remind you. Show your understanding by using your own words and support your ideas with references to the text. And that's quite important that you do that. You need to use quotations, short quotations ideally, but you also need to be able to say things in your own words. So what do we learn about how the ladybird spider is being saved? Well, if we go down and we look in our margins, we've got the fact they're being saved early on here. Well, that's not going to be terribly relevant. This is more about the growing numbers and how they've been saved in the past. So I think we're really more interested in future plans. Now we're starting to get somewhere here about the nature of where this is occurring in Dorset and how it's going to begin with 30 ladybirds being used, and then that's going to be built up to more if they're successful in their new homes. And then also here we've got the details that we highlighted about some spiders being taken to their new home in plastic water bottles. So already we've got just a couple of ideas just from what we've read so far. So let's take this idea of plastic water bottles and let's see how that would look like if we write that out. What do you understand about how the ladybird is being saved from extinction? I learn that ladybird spiders are being, let's just see what the text said, taken to their new home in plastic water bottles. Being taken to their new homes in plastic water bottles. Okay, now at the moment that's probably only going to get me a mark if I'm lucky, because I haven't really demonstrated that I've really understood what that might mean. And what do I mean by that? Well, the fact that you're taking these rare spiders and you're taking them to a new habitat in water bottles is, I think, quite surprising. You probably would expect something more sophisticated, more unusual. So I think what the examiner is looking for in 1B, as opposed to question 1A, is that you really understand. You really understand. And so if that's the case, then we need to make sure that we've demonstrated this is unusual. So this method of transporting spiders seems unusual, but has obviously proven to be effective. Now that's really now demonstrating that I've understood what I've read, because I've taken an idea from the text, I've given a quotation, and then this is the really all-important sentence here. I've explained it in a bit more detail. I've really shown my understanding by using my own words. Now, if you were to write two little tiny tabloid paragraphs like that, that should get you your 3, perhaps even 4 marks. And if you wrote 3 of those, then you would definitely get your 4 marks. So we'll try it for perhaps another quick idea. And maybe on the theme of the water bottles, if we read on here, we spoke about how they're being filled with heather and moss. And heather and moss are kind of plants, aren't they? So I might just continue my idea here. These bottles are being filled with natural things, my quotations, remember, such as heather and moss. And as I did here with my explanation, I think I just need to be quite clear why that's important, what I've understood by that. And I think what I've understood is that by using these water bottles, you're taking these spiders and taking them from one place to another, but trying to adjust them to their new homes. So I might put something like, by using these natural things, the conservationists are clearly trying to help the spiders to adjust to their new homes, or habitats might even be a better word. And that at the moment would be enough to get me 3 marks. it would possibly even get me 4 marks. But like I said to you earlier, if you haven't gone over your 18 minutes and you've got a chance to write another paragraph, that will definitely secure your 4 marks. And this particular structure we're looking at here is also how you answer question 2, by making a clear point, weaving in a short quotation, and then explaining the significance of that. So now we move to the next question, question 2. And question 2 is really, as I mentioned, the same as question 1b. I think probably the two obvious differences are that it's a different source, so it'd be a different type of text, a different genre, a different audience, and a different purpose. And because it's worth 8 marks as opposed to 4, you're going to have to do more. So again, you're looking to secure about 5 marks. Again, the idea of taking topic sentences and tiny mini paragraph summaries is going to be fruitful for you. And again, about 17 or 18 minutes on this question, including your reading time, which, if you think about it, it's probably about 5 or 6 minutes per text. And what you're aiming for is a minimum of 3 inferences. And all an inference is where you take a quotation or an idea from the text and you look at what you think it might mean beyond the obvious, what the writer is trying to tell to you. And you can do that with examples and your comments. So let's go back to our source material. Okay, source number 2 clearly looks visibly different to the previous one. It's got a large image, and again there are different details at the top, which in the pressure of an exam hall you can neglect this information at the top, but I think if you do so, you're missing out on a real trick, because it's obviously really important. It tells you how to read the text. So what do I mean by that? Let's have a look. The source is the book cover and an extract from the book by Steve Backshall. So a book is obviously different to a web page, different kind of readership, different kind of engagement with it. And it also tells you the genre. So it's by Steve Backshall, telling his life story, looking for adventure. So we're thinking about biography or autobiography, and picking out the bits in your life that helped to shape you in the person that you are today. Now, you'll also notice that the text is laid out differently than the previous one, so we might need a slightly different strategy. Previously, we were looking at maybe one sentence in each small paragraph to highlight, and 1 point in each margin to highlight. This time, we might need to do the same strategy might work, or we might need to also think about, is there 2 sentences in this? Where what's the important information? And rather than having 1 paragraph summary, perhaps should we have a couple? So we'll see how we get on with this. I'm going to read probably down to about this bit here, paragraph 2, perhaps maybe something to 3. Again, employing the same strategies that we just looked at. We made our way up the rough driveway to Collingwood House, through the thick bushes to a collection of ramshackle buildings surrounded by towering oak and silver birch trees. Now already this is a different type of text. And I already thought it would be, because I realised it was a life story, it was from a book, and it reads, even though it's about one particular person, it reads more like a story a little bit, in the way that somebody's trying to set a particular scene. And for some reason this place, Collingwood House, is important. So I'm gonna not sure what it is yet, but I'm gonna just recognise the fact that it's cropped up. The main farmhouse was a little more than 100 years old. Bright blue paint along the rafters failed to cover up the fact that they, and almost everything else, were deeply rotten. The whole place seemed like a vision, and my parents were both starry-eyed the second that they saw it. Okay, so this paragraph is clearly has something to do with this place called Collingwood House. So it's an old house. It's got a farm as part of it. So I'm going to put description of old house. Again, some of the features you might associate with narrative. And I might put here, just to remind me, his parents' reaction to it. So he was obviously still living with his parents at this time. So this is going to be, one would suspect, a childhood memory. And I've inferred that from the way that it's written. Let's keep going. Mum and Dad took up the management of the place in the way in the way of a lifestyle than just a home. They planted an enormous vegetable patch. I think that's important, what I just read. They planted an enormous vegetable patch and embarked on the impossible task of rebuilding the dilapidated buildings. After a few months, our first rescue animal arrived, an asthmatic donkey called Barney, and after that the floodgates opened. We collected all sorts: dogs, goats, floppy-eared rabbits, 2 intimidating geese called Victoria and Albert, and an Exmoor pony called Walnut, who deliberately headed for low-hanging branches to try and forcibly remove anyone daft enough to try and ride him. So this is more explaining rather than setting the scene, and I can tell that because of some of the facts that have been used, some of the details that have been provided. If I was to, in my own words, put what I think is the focus of this paragraph, I would say, well, here we get the idea of rebuilding an old house, and that his parents are doing that. They are converting it. And I think this second part of the paragraph is about variety of animals. And it hasn't been explicitly told to me, but what I think I've realised now is that as a youngster, Steve Backshall, his family moved to this old farmhouse. They started to do the work themselves to do it up, and they've started to have animals living there as part of a rescue mission. So this is all about his parents looking after animals and him being part and growing up in that environment. So already, just to give you a model, I've got enough, I think, to start making a couple of points. So if I go back to my question paper, and my question paper says, from Steve Backshall's Looking for an Adventure, where he describes his childhood home, explain what you learn about Steve's childhood home. Remember to show your understanding by the text by explaining your own words and support your ideas with the text. So the same deal as the previous question with the bullet points given there to help you. If you remember, the first thing in the initial paragraph that we looked at was the fact that it was a bit of an old home. If you remember his parents' reaction to it, then the variety of animals that came to live there. So already we've got three different ideas, and probably what you would be sensible to do is to take your ideas from across the whole text, but we haven't really got time to do that this morning. So we're just going to look at maybe writing up one or two of these as examples. So we take the first one about the old home. What do we learn about Steve's childhood? So the first thing that we learn about... Now, I think it's always best to use the writer's surname. So if you want to put Steve, that's okay, but we're going to use the surname. It just sounds a bit more sophisticated. The first thing that we learn about Backshall's childhood is that he moved to an old, rundown building which his parents converted into, now what would be the words? Probably a rescue centre, I think most of us would be able to come up with. Rescue centre for animals. Now, there's some really quotations here, a little more than 100 years old. We looked at bright blue paint rafters failed to cover up the fact that they and almost everything else were deeply rotten. So we'll just use that quotation, deeply rotten. And what else can we use? Just support the idea that this place was old and needed converting. Maybe we take the idea from here about the parents' reaction. They were both starry-eyed, so let's put that. Okay, so the first thing we learn about Backshall's childhood is that he moved to an old rundown building which his parents converted into a rescue centre for animals. The building is described as deeply rotten. Again, you need to, once you've put your quotation in your evidence, you need to make sure that you've inferred something from there. The building is described as deeply rotten, which suggests that much work was needed to make it better. Now I've got a choice here. I could continue this idea in the same paragraph, or it might be more helpful to make a separate point, a new paragraph about the parents' reaction. So I might say, Backshall makes it clear that despite the amount of work needed to, what was the place called? I think it was called Collingwood House. So despite the amount of work needed to mend Collingwood House, his parents were keen to do the improvements. Again, need a quotation. He explains how his parents were both starry-eyed, which suggests that they were looking forward to the repairs and turning the old farmhouse into a place to look after animals. Now, later on, because I'd imagine that you've either read that text once or twice before, I could talk about the variety of animals they had and how much of a pleasure that was for Bakshal, and probably help to inspire him later on in his life. In the paragraph here, he talks about the woodlands and how much pleasure that they gave him. It was a place where he kind of got to know nature and felt very much part of nature, and he was able to name different things. So there's lots of different things that I could talk about in this particular question, but already I've got 2 paragraphs, and I think if I had a third, that would be enough certainly to get me my 5 or 6 marks, and probably even more. And again, if you can write more quickly, then you might even be able to get 4 in, but what you mustn't do is sacrifice that time for some of the later questions. So let's move on now to the next question, which is question 3. Now, question 3 is possibly the most trickiest of the questions, because it requires you to analyse, and analysis is quite difficult, particularly of language. So you need to have a strategy about how to respond to the text in front of you on the day of the exam, and how to use the knowledge that you've built up over the last few years to structure a decent response. And I'm going to show you a couple of things to help you to plan those ideas and to have something to think about in the exam. But what you mustn't do is just use it as a template or a checklist where you're going to find those things and they're going to be in every text, because that may not be the case. So question 3 then is the language analysis question. And quite simply and reassuringly, all the examiner is looking for is that you can find some features of language that you understand what language is, and that you can identify them with quotations, and most importantly, you can explain the intended effects. And if you can do that 3 or 4 times, then you'll get the marks that you require. So the key information. Text question 3 will refer to source 3. It's worth a total of 12 marks, and you're looking to get about 8. There are lots of active reading strategies you can do, which are different to questions 1 and 2. And we're going to look at an acronym called a FART crime, which may or may not be similar to the ones that you use in school. I'm sure lots of different schools have lots of different ways of remembering linguistic or language techniques, and all of them are perfectly valid. You want to spend slightly longer on this question because it's more difficult and because it's worth more marks. And if I was to advise you about how many points you're looking to do, you're probably looking for about a minimum of 4 different language features with examples and with effects. So what is a FART crime? Well, it's simply an acronym for the majority of the most popular aspects of language that will crop up on most pieces of writing. And some of them are poetic methods. Others are things more to do with the words themselves and the various connotations around those. So obviously, starting from the top, that's alliteration, where you have a repeated consonant sound. Depending on the type of source, you'll have use of factual information or details. Some might be more biased and contain more opinions. Some will have a combination of both. There will always be adjectives, verbs, and nouns. And if you can use various strategies to identify those, probably beyond simply thinking of them as describing, doing, and naming words, because that's sometimes true, but not always, then that will be something good that you can do in the exam. Things are quite often repeated for rhetorical reasons. Individual words, phrases, clauses, or structures can quite often create interesting effects. Sometimes writers will write in the first person, so they'll be using things like I, we, us. Sometimes they might write and directly try and engage the reader in the second person, so that's you, yours, and you are. And sometimes in the third person, maybe to create a more neutral tone, so he, she, they. Colloquial language is I suppose the posh word for informal words, or not so much slang, but words that you might use on a more unfamiliar basis. So an example might be the use of the word mate instead of the more standard friend or acquaintance. Rhetorical questions. Imperative verbs are verbs that have an element of commanding somebody to do something, not necessarily a strong command, but something where you're saying like look, see, write. More poetic methods such as metaphors and similes. And finally, the use of emotive words, where a particular word has been chosen because it's got some heat attached to it, something that kind of stirs an opinion or an emotion. So now we look at the next source down, which you can see already is really different to the previous two. You should be able to see that this is more like a leaflet. It's got a greater use of visuals, and rather than set paragraphs, all the information is boxed off in different areas. And that might be something we can look at later, but at the moment we're looking at language. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. And this time we need a slightly different strategy. So because we're looking at language, let's circle anything that we read through and think is what the writer is trying to achieve through words. And again, our starting point is, what is this text? Well, it's a leaflet. My intuition and my understanding of text, without even reading it, makes it clear to me that this is probably advising me or telling me or helping me to do something because of the different visual clues, such as the images, the text boxes, the numbering, etc. But obviously, the more that I read through it, the greater sense of an understanding of that I will get. The title is a good place to start. Make a hedgehog home. So, this is what it's about. It's giving me some information and some guidance on how to construct a hedgehog home. Offer your local hedgehog a safe home in your garden and throw away your slug pellets, as hedgehogs will love to munch your slugs and snails. Right, so I'm nice and clear about the purpose and the audience. Anyone who cares about the environment, wants to do something good, and is keen to kind of to deal with the problems of hedgehogs, but in a safe way. So, what have we got in the title? We've got make a hedgehog home. So already we've got an example of one of those imperative use of verbs. Not a strong command, but just inviting us to do something. Offer your local hedgehog a safe home in your garden. Well, I've already noticed then that twice the writer has used the second person, a direct address. And that's interesting because it seems this leaflet is communicating to me on a personal level. So that's quite effective. Your local hedgehog. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Describing it as my local hedgehog. I think that particular word choice makes me think that I have hedgehogs that are in and around my garden that are unique to me. And because that's a word that's describing this noun here, and because it becomes before the noun, then I think I'm safe to assume that's functioning as an adjective. And throw away your slug pellets, as hedgehogs will love to munch your slugs and snails. Well, munch. That strikes me as quite a chatty, colloquial word that's appropriate to create a sense of familiarity and warmth between this leaflet and the people reading it. Your slugs and snails. Again, they're describing them as mine. And already just a little bit of alliteration here. Not in any contrived, deliberate way, but almost naturally. And it gives it that sense of a rhythm and a chattiness and something that's kind of memorable as a message. So if I go over to the answer booklet, I just want to make it clear what's going on in my mind as a reader. And I'm aware I've only looked at the first, not even the first paragraph really, the introduction, but what I'm trying to display is the the sheer volume of things that you could say about language, even in just a tiny couple of sentences. So already I've got the writer uses a number of imperative verbs, such as offer, throw, and they're not ordering me to do something, but they're just inviting me to take a particular course of action. I've got the use of the second person, which is giving us a sense of a direct address, speaking directly to me. I've got some gentle alliteration just to reinforce the idea this is to be helpful. So I've got slugs and snails. I've also got some colloquial, informal, chatty language, which is creating that sense of the people who designed this leaflet are trying to help me. And also it feeds into the idea of hedgehogs. What else have we got? Let's look at maybe this bit here. Next. Oh, that's interesting. Next, what kind of word is that? I don't know the name of it, but it seems to be moving me on from this particular set of points to something new. So if I describe that as maybe sequencing words, discourse marker, it's helping me sort of move from one idea to the next and showing me where to progress in my making of my hedgehog home. If I go back to a fart crime, you'll notice that I don't have on here anything called sequencing language or discourse markers. And this is what I was trying to say to you earlier, that whilst it's great to have an acronym or something that jogs your memory of the major aspects of language use, anything that you devise, you won't be able to contain everything. And sometimes you need to respond to the text in a natural, fluid way, rather than necessarily just going through this as some kind of checklist. So here, I've been able to realise that next is something different, something new, but clearly it's also around the idea of helping me to construct this hedgehog home. Let's keep going. Cut a hole. Right, cut is another imperative verb. About 15 centimetres squared in the base of the box. This should be done by someone who is experienced with a jigsaw. Right, should is a different kind of verb. That's a modal verb. And modal verbs are words like could, would, should, must, can, may. And what they do is they imply degrees of possibility, degrees of probability. And that can be very useful in advising somebody, because you don't want to tell them do this, do that, but you want to give them a sense of what's most likely to happen. So here I've got should, because they're trying to advise you about the safety aspects of preparing this box for the hedgehog. Drill a hole big enough for the hose to fit into the other side of the box, put the bedding into the box, attach the battens to the lid with nails or wood glue so the lid sits snugly on the top of the box, put the lid on. So already you've got lots of examples at the beginning of imperative verbs. Put, attach, drill. Another put here. We've got a little kind of more colloquial language like sitting snugly, which is another alliterative device. So we keep going through a large chunk of the text, but we probably wouldn't do all of it because it's going to be quite time consuming. And I think we've already got quite enough on our plate already to write about. So as an example, let's write a couple of these up. Okay, actually I'm going to quickly go back and I want to get some better examples. What did I have? Drill, put, attach. Okay. Drill, put, attach. Okay. Right. So if we take this first idea here, how did the writer use language features in the leaflet? Nice clear opening sentence. The writer uses imperative verbs to help the reader follow the instructions for making a hedgehog home. Nice clear opening sentence. I now need some examples, so I might put, for example, the words offer, throw, drill, put and attach. All help. This bit I'm now writing is probably the most important part of your little paragraph. It's demonstrating this part, explaining the effects. For example, the words offer, throw, drill, put, attach all make sure that the reader is able to be guided through the process and know what they are doing. Now, some of you will be able to maybe write another sentence, and I think those words sound quite gentle. They're asking us to do something, but they're not telling us or demanding something. It's not trying to sell us something. So I might put these verbs are gentle and help reassure the reader who is unfamiliar with building hedgehog homes. Okay, now if you wrote 4 paragraphs like that, that would be more than enough to get your 8 marks. It would probably get you rather more. It would probably get you more like 10 or 11. So some of you might not necessarily always be able to come up with a second sentence here, but it's a good place to try and aim for. Let's write up this second idea about the second person. Throughout the text, the writer uses the second person. The writer explains how you can help your local hedgehogs by building them new homes. Again, I need to explain that. Speaking directly to the reader helps to build a sense of conversation and show that the text is trying to build a relationship of trust. I could also maybe extend that and say that I think what this text is also trying to achieve is to encourage people that these are to take ownership of the wildlife around their gardens. So maybe I'll write that. The direct address also helps people to see their local wildlife as part of their responsibility. Right, again, so I've written half my answer here, and if I were to write twice that'd be more than enough. And sometimes you might identify a number of language features that you don't have time to write up. It may even be possible to combine things. So here, where I've got the reference to local, remember I said to you that could well be an adjective. I could drop that in here as an extra point. I could say the adjective local makes the hedgehogs seem like they belong in people's gardens and should not be killed by pellets. So sometimes you might want to take your paragraph off in a slightly different direction, depending on what features you've identified, how comfortable you are with those, and what you may have to say. So that's question 3. Let's move on now to question 4. Question 4 is another question that's worth 12 marks. And this is the comparative presentational devices. And let's just be clear, I'm not now looking at words and what words mean. I'm looking for the way in which pictures, any kind of aspect of arrangement is used and what the effect is. I'm only going to write about 2 sources referred to in the question. Sometimes you'll get a choice. It's worth 12 marks. Again, you need about 8. And to try and really simplify what we actually mean by presentational devices, I want you to look at this bit here. I'm looking at colors, layouts, images, and fonts, and it has another helpful acronym called CLIF. And I'll go through what that actually means in more detail in a second. Again, with the language question, in an ideal world, if you've got time and the confidence, you're looking for about 4 points of comparison. And I think CLIF will help you to achieve that. So what do I mean by CLIF? Well, it's just another useful way of remembering the main aspects of presentational features. As I said with language, that you will sometimes encounter things that you haven't foreseen because that's the nature of an exam. It's unseen. You don't know the text or the sources that the examiners are going to choose. But I think they will broadly fall into these 4 categories. Colours. What colours have been used? What are the connotations of those colours? Do they match the theme or the topic of the text? Are there any significant contrast in colours? What's the impact on the audience? Do they match the purpose? Layout. Quite often students ignore layout, but actually, if you think about it, it's vital. Layout is all this information that you've got, the pictures, the text, the titles, the logos, all of those things, where you place them in relation to each other, how big they are, how small, what kind of, all those things are aspects of layout, and they make a big difference. So are bullet points used? What is the background? They're, again, examples of writing about layout within presentational devices. Images. There's usually 1 or more images that you can refer to, and they're quite fruitful for analysing different aspects of meaning. But you want to consider, are they real photographs? Are they in colour? Are they in black and white? Are they close up? Are they further away? What's actually shown in the picture? And again, what's the effect? How does it relate to the wider text? And also fonts. Not the words themselves, but the colour, shape, style, and size of those words. And again, what is the effect on the reader? Now, no one's expecting you to know the names of every font, but what you certainly can do is to describe their style. And I think I'll give you an example of that in a minute. So if we go back to our source material, and maybe if we clear some of what we've already come up with, I think the exams give me a choice of which ones to use. So I'm going to use source 2. I think that's got a lot of presentational features on, namely the picture. I think a lot to say here. And I'm going to use this one here. It's got loads of presentational features. So what I'm really looking to do is just to remind myself of some of the chief aspects. So maybe this time I'll use a rectangle. So what things have I got here? Well, the image kind of dominates the presentation here, and is 2 parts of the image. There's Steve Backshall looking kind of calm and philosophical and looking out into the distance, and this one's showing him in the middle of some action and adventure. So maybe that's because they're different sides to his personality, and in any kind of life story you'd have some more reflective moments, but also you probably have some moments where you are kind of engaged in more thrilling activities. And of course, someone whose book's called Looking for Adventure is going to go into a lot of detail there. What can I say about the text? Well, if you look here very closely, and you'll be able to notice that this text looks quite battered here. It's in yellow, but clearly it's been quite rugged, and maybe it's spattered with mud. And the words themselves are about adventure, so I think it's entirely appropriate for the text to take on that kind of feature. You've also got Steve Backshall in white here, which is a really kind of striking contrast to the darkness behind that, and has really draw attention to the man, because this is an autobiography. And it got legend here at the top, the kind of strap lines, which is kind of giving you a dramatic overview of the contents of his book. So there's lots of things to say there. If we now go to the Making a Hedgehog Home, we will see that of all the three texts, this has probably got the most in terms of presentational devices. So if we start with the first aspect of Cliff, we can really talk about the predominance of reds and browns throughout the text, particularly in the background. I can't really see, is it? Yeah, these look like leaves in the background, don't they? So this is really trying to convey an earthy, natural image, and all the colours that are used complement that, I think. So that's the thing I can talk about with colours. Layout. Well, this is a text that's trying to get me to talk me through how to build a hedgehog home. And it'd be really helpful if I could visualize what that looked like in steps. And it's done that, hasn't it? So you've got 3 images here rather than the one earlier, or the 2. And these exemplify or demonstrate the different aspects of building this hedgehog home. Because I've annotated in the way that I have, it's hard to see, but they're also helpfully numbered as well. Again, making it nice and clear that I'm looking down this way. That's the first step, that's the second, that's the third. And also they match up quite helpfully to the brief instructions to the side. I remember I said to you earlier about the layout. Well, the layout's really important because if I had this bit here, number 1, in the bottom right and the number 3 up here, then that would be very unhelpful. I'd be having to try and find where the guidance is or where the picture is that matches the things that I need to do. I could talk about the images themselves, and these are realistic photographs. They don't have anybody in here, and what they show is pretty much in a very basic form what things you need, what you can look like from above, and then it's finished product here. And again, they're real photographs rather than diagrams to show you that it's achievable. Font, well, I mentioned about style earlier. I haven't got a clue what style this of writing this font is here, but it looks to me like handwriting. And I think that would be enough to comment on the use of handwriting. It's almost like scribbled little notes that somebody has taken to show you how easy it can be to build this home. And actually, another point that I could make is that these seem to be on loose pieces of paper as well, don't they? Again, helping to highlight the naturalness of this process, the ease of this process, and the way that anybody can create a hedgehog home. So that gives me enough to talk about, I think. So if I go back to my presentation. Now, you don't have to, and I certainly wouldn't do it in this much detail, but in the exam, if you drew out a very quick planning table covering the major things that you've just been aware of, that would give you a lot of confidence when it comes to the writing up phase. So here, I've just put down some of the things that we've just spoken about, and I've done it under the guise of colours, layout, image, and font. But it may be that you have 2 or 3 things that you could say about colours, but maybe nothing about font, in which case your colours section might be bigger. Or you might have lots to say about the images, but very little to say about the layout. So again, you might have this section to be slightly bigger. I would say what you do need to do is to try and have some kind of range across them. So whilst you might not have all 4 aspects, you'd probably have 2 or 3 of them. So you've got that broad range to show the examiner. So let's maybe try and write up this part here about the photographs. So let's just take this information here and transpose it here. Right. So I'm just going to clear some of this. I've got a nice big space to work. Okay. So my ideas then are pretty much as I've got here. And what I want to try and do, if I possibly can, is to write this into one comparative paragraph. So this is what it would look like. Remember to write about the way the sources are presented, explain the effect, and compare the way they look. Right. So I'm going to say something like both source 2 and source 3 use images to engage with their readers. Now, at the moment, I'm not really getting many marks for that. It's not the world's greatest sentence, but it helps structure my paragraph. So I'm now going to talk about the pictures used in source 2. In source 2, there are 2 different images of Steve Backshall. Now, it's hard to quote, obviously, when you're looking at presentation devices, so you can describe instead. There are two different images of Steve Backshall. One of him looking serious and into the distance, and the other of him, what's it doing? Of him climbing up some ropes in the trees. Now, again, that's effectively my evidence. Okay, I've described it rather than quoted it because it's very difficult to quote a presentational device. But now I need to explain it. These two different images show the different sides to Backshall's personality. He can be quiet and thoughtful, but also very adventurous. With a love of danger. Now, I haven't mentioned it here, but one of the things that you can do is sometimes use quotations from the text just to support the things that you're doing. I can't think of one necessarily here, unless I take it from the idea that the book is called Looking for Adventure. Maybe I'll do that. Yeah, he can be very quiet and thoughtful, but also very adventurous with a love of danger, which is suggested by the title of the book, Looking for Adventure. Now, I've got a choice here. I can either do this as one particular paragraph, or I can write it as a second paragraph. It depends how you paragraph in your mind. I personally think this is pretty much the same kind of point, so I'm going to keep it in the same paragraph. So I might say now, this contrasts with the use of pictures in source 3. In the leaflet, there are 3 pictures of the different phases of building the hedgehog home. Maybe just need to give an example of those different phases. The first shows all the materials that you need, whilst the second and third show the box being built and then in place in the garden or wherever. Again, I'm missing the all-important third sentence here, the explanative part, so I just need to put that in. These 3 pictures, and in the order they are, help to guide the reader through making of the hedgehog box or the hedgehog home. Now, again, remember I said to you that could be one paragraph or 2. If you wrote 3 times this amount, that would be enough. Enough to get you 8 marks, and probably if you did it this much detail, it would get you 10 or 11. If you strip some of this away, then you would probably need to write 4 different points out. But as you can see here, my focus in this section is the images. I might do something similar with the layout, or I might look at perhaps the font styles, the idea of the battered yellow colouring versus the use of italics or handwriting to give that sort of friendly feel. Okay. Now, that pretty much is the end of what I was going to go through with you today. So what we'll do now is I'll turn off the sound, and I'll ask any questions that you might have, and I'll answer those, and I'll send those responses to everybody. So, going to finish now, and if you have any questions, use the question tool on your screens. Send those questions to me, and I'll respond as many as I can in the next 15 or 20 minutes.